Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government motion we've been debating today asks us to recognise that the draft energy strategy and just transition plan sets out a just and fair pathway to maximise the opportunities of that transition. But the consultation for this draft plan has not yet closed, and the Scottish Government has already come under sustained criticism for the inadequacy of its plans. As highlighted by my colleague Richard Leonard in today's debate, the Government's own Just Transition Commission are frustrated with the pace and detail of the Scottish Government's plans. So, Presiding Officer, Labour cannot support this motion today, and instead we urge members across the Chamber to support our amendment. In opening today's debate, the Cabinet Secretary acknowledged the importance of avoiding another betrayal of workers of the scale seen during Thatcher's attack on miners. Yet, recent independent analysis on the Scottish Government's own energy system transition plans raised major concerns about the need for rapid development of domestic jobs to ensure communities are not devastated by an unjust transition, not least in my own constituency of the North East, which has 98% of direct oil and gas jobs. I'd like to make some progress. And although Scotland already has a significant share of Europe's onshore and offshore wind capacity, we are hardly manufacturing any of the infrastructure for them here in Scotland. Consecutive reports and analysis make clear that Scotland must develop domestic supply chains, or our communities' wealth will be piped abroad, just as our oil is. Presiding Officer, the risk to communities like those in the North East is huge, and yet the Government repeatedly leaves those workers and communities out of its plans, despite claiming to include them in its motion today. The reality is it's taking environmental organisations like Friends of the Earth Scotland to draw up transition demands through their Our Power consultation. Workers have told us they want public investment in energy companies, safety, security and fair pay across the industry to enable them to move from oil and gas into renewables. So the Scottish Government must commit to working with the workers in these industries who make up the communities most at risk in this time of change to be led by their needs. Happy to take an intervention from the Energy Minister.
Minister.
Well, very grateful to Mercedes Villalba. It's not true to say it's environmental organisations are the only one that have been engaging with workers. I had a survey out myself when I was backbencher, and also the Scottish Government had a survey out as well, which actually had a tremendous response as well. So there's actually a great deal of work been going on to engage with workers as well, with unions.
Ms Villalba.
Those consultations turned into action for workers. In addition to this lack of urgency around protecting communities from economic collapse, the Government is consistently over-promising and under-delivering on climate change and biodiversity improvement measures. My colleague Sarah Boyack highlighted the UK Committee on Climate Change's concerns around Scotland failing to meet targets, especially around peatland restoration and protection, which the Government does not mention in its motion. Peatlands are an essential carbon sink, as well as a site of biodiversity, so I welcomed the First Minister's promise on Tuesday that he will deliver 110,000 hectares of restored peatland. But this is less than half of what the Government promised only 2 years ago, when they pledged £250 million to restore 250,000 hectares by 2030. This downgrading of the promise on peatlands comes after we found out in January that the Government had achieved only 28% of its annual goal of restoring 20,000 hectares in the year 2021 to 22. And this comes after the Government inflated their own figures by 40%, underestimating their own shortcomings until Nature Scot corrected them. Peatlands should be offering substantial carbon capture, improved habitats for our native wildlife, resilience to extreme weather and vital green jobs. Yet, according to the Government's own figures, 80% of our peatlands are damaged. Nature Scot have also shown that many of our native species still struggle as they face the combined effect of biodiversity loss and climate change. The average abundance of our 2,803 marine and terrestrial species are still well below historic figures and continue to be damaged by extreme weather, habitat loss and scarcity of food. We all know our natural environment is a complex ecosystem with interdependent parts. This means there are significant knock-on effects of the Government's failure to improve our native biodiversity, our habitats such as the peatlands, and our air and water quality. So all of these must be rapidly addressed to ensure Scotland meets its ambitious targets on the climate and environment. So it's positive that the government's Scottish biodiversity strategy, announced last year, promises to reverse biodiversity loss by 2045. This is an ambitious target, and if met, it would have a significant effect across Scotland. But given the consistent inability to keep its promises, it's hard to have confidence that biodiversity targets will not go the way of the peatlands. A great dream, but far from reality. So what we now need is not more promises, but action. Action to address the current and future challenges facing our communities, our habitats, and our climate. To conclude, Presiding Officer, Labour agree with the Government on the urgency of the climate crisis, as well as the need to make sure the transition to a net zero future is just. And we will always work constructively cross-party to achieve the change Scotland needs. However, today's self-congratulatory motion from the Government will not help us meet our goals. It does not bring clarity on the Government's approach, and it does not instil confidence that the SNP are the party to guide the country through the challenges ahead. So I urge all members to support the Labour amendment, which strengthens this Parliament's commitment to an urgent and wholehearted tackling of climate change to ensure all communities of Scotland are brought with us on this transition. Thank you.